My name is Daphne Alden. I'm 28 years old. And last Thursday night, my parents invited me home for dinner, then locked the door, sat me down in front of a marriage contract with a man I'd never met, and said, "This is happening tonight." There was an officiant in the corner of the living room. My father stood blocking the only exit. My mother looked at me the way you look at a problem you've already solved. Calm, certain, finished. And you know what? She was right, as everything had already been decided. Just not the way she thought. Before I go on, if this story hits something real for you, go ahead and hit like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to. And if you're listening right now, drop a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. I'm always curious who's up with me. Let me take you back 3 weeks, not to the dinner itself, but to the phone call that shattered my world. Before I tell you what they did, you need to know who I am, or who I used to be, because those feel like two entirely different people now. I live alone in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, just 30 minutes outside of Grayson, Georgia. I'm an administrative assistant at a local veterinary clinic. I pay my rent early, I don't drink, I don't smoke, and my wildest Friday nights involve binge-watching shows on the couch with my cat. By every measure that actually matters to me, my life is quiet. It is safe, it is fine. But to my mother, Lucille Alden, my quiet life is an insult. To her, fine is just another word for failure. She calls me at least 4 times a week, never to ask how my day was, only to interrogate me. Where were you Sunday? Who were you with? Why are you hiding away? And always, always the same sharp blade of a question. You're 28 and still alone, Daphne. Do you know what people say about us? Us. It's always about her. I started ignoring her calls. That only made the punishment worse. Last Easter, I drove the 50 minutes home because the endless guilt tripping had become unbearable. I walked through the front door, pie in hand, trying to smile. Before I could even set the dish on the kitchen counter, she turned to my uncle's wife and smirked. "This is Daphne, still single, still scrubbing cages at that little dog clinic." She laughed. She said it like my entire existence was a punchline everyone was in on. My father, Gregory, sat at the head of the dining table. He said absolutely nothing. He never does. He just gave this slow, heavy nod. He agreed with every cruel word, but couldn't be bothered to speak them himself. His silence has always hit me harder than her voice. It meant there was no one in my corner. I was 25 the first time the thought crept into my mind. Maybe loving your parents doesn't mean you have to survive everything they do to you. That was the year I bought the notebook. I didn't know why I needed it yet. I just knew I was drowning, and I needed to prove to myself that the water was real. But someone had already breached my safe little bubble before the real trap was sprung. Wednesday afternoon, just a day before the dinner, a man walked into the clinic, tall, dark sport coat, ice-cold eyes that seemed to strip the paint off the walls. He didn't even have a pet with him. He just stood by the counter asking questions. What were my hours? Did I live alone? Was I planning on staying in Grayson? I brushed it off as small town creeping, just some weirdo passing through. I had no idea he was doing an inspection. He was appraising his property before he signed the deed. Then came Tuesday. I was restocking the supply cabinet when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Aunt Delia. She never ever calls during work hours. My stomach dropped. I stepped out the back door, leaning against the cold brick wall by the dumpsters. "Hello? Daphne." Her voice was shaking. Not in a dramatic way. It was the tight, breathless tremor of someone trying desperately not to fall apart. "I need you to listen to me. Do not speak until I am done." I froze. The breeze felt suddenly freezing against my neck. "Your mother called me this afternoon," Delia whispered. She was excited. Bragging, really. "Tomorrow night they are having a dinner at the house." She said they are finally taking care of the Daphne situation. The Daphne situation. "There's a man," Delia continued. "Wyatt Preston. He's 39. There is an officiant coming. And there is a contract." I had to say her name 3 times before the ringing in my ears stopped. "Delia. Delia, what do you mean a contract?" "A marriage contract, baby. Tied to an irrevocable financial proxy. It is already pre-signed by your mother and your father." She took a ragged breath. "Wyatt's family owns land out past Route 14. Your daddy owes them a lot of money." She wanted me there to witness my niece finally doing the right thing. Delia's voice went dead serious. "I told her I was busy, but I am not letting you walk into that house blind. You do not owe them your life, Daphne." The line clicked dead. I walked to my car in a daze. I sat behind the steering wheel for a long time. The The plastic of the wheel dug into my palms. My hands were violently shaking, but not from fear exactly. It was a sick, heavy realization. It was the feeling of puzzle pieces violently snapping together, the years of harsh calls, the crushing guilt, the absolute isolation. It suddenly formed a terrifying shape I could finally see. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was currency. I had 48 hours, and for the first time in 28 years, I wasn't going to be a good girl. Driving home in the dark, the highway lights bleeding through my windshield, my mind raced. Every scenario ended in a cage. If I don't show up, Mom will call every relative in a 60-mile radius. She'll tell her walking group I'm unstable. She'll spin the story until I'm the monster. And in a small town like Grayson, once you are the villain, you stay the villain forever. They have a long memory and zero attention span for the truth. If I show up and refuse, Dad will physically block the door. I know he will. 4 years ago, when I packed a bag to move out, he stood in the doorway, arms crossed like a brick wall. You walk out, don't come back. If I show up and say yes, I lose my soul. I lose my apartment, my job, and the 4 years of learning what silence sounds like when it's peaceful. I pulled into my dark parking spot. A neighbor's TV flickered blue in the window above. I closed my eyes and listened to my engine tick, and then a single image flashed in my mind, the navy blue notebook. 4 years of exact dates, times, direct quotes. Every time she called me an embarrassment, every cruel, silent text from him, I thought I was just keeping a diary to save my sanity. I didn't know I was building a loaded weapon, and tomorrow night I was going to pull the trigger. I pulled the notebook from my nightstand drawer. It had a cheap navy blue cover with heavily doe-geared corners. Inside those pages lay 4 years of my mother's voice, pressed flat like ugly dried weeds. Over 300 entries, November 15th, 3 years ago. Mom called at 10 o'clock at night. She threatened to tell my grandmother I was secretly living with a man if I didn't come home for Christmas. I lived completely alone, April 4th, last year. Dad texted, "Your mother cried all night." He gave zero context. When I called him in a panic, he hung up on me after 15 seconds. August 20th. Mom lied to Aunt Pamela, telling her I got fired from the clinic. I hadn't. She just refused to consider it a real career. Entry after entry. Dates, direct, word-for-word quotes, printed screenshots taped carefully to the paper. I hadn't fully understood what I was building back then. I just needed proof. I needed to see the madness in black and white to know I wasn't losing my mind. I dialed Morgan Tate at 10 that night. We went to high school together, and now she works as a fierce paralegal at the county attorney's office. She picked up on the third ring. That tells you everything about the kind of friend she is. I spilled the entire nightmare. The warning from Delia, the forced dinner, the marriage contract, Wyatt Preston, the hired officiant. Morgan was dead silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the phone, sharp and clinical. "Daphne, listen to me closely. This isn't just family drama. This is coercive control, and Georgia law has a process for this." I didn't sleep a wink that night, not because I was trembling with fear, because for the very first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving their abuse. I was finally deciding how to fight back. Thursday morning, I called the clinic and asked Dr. Miller for a personal day. She didn't ask a single question. That's why I've stayed working for her for 4 years. By 8:45 a.m., I was marching through the heavy glass doors of the county courthouse. Morgan was already waiting in the busy lobby. She handed me a thick clipboard. "Emergency protective order application," she instructed, her eyes completely focused. "You write the narrative. I'll guide you through the legal terms." I sat at a cold metal table in the hallway and poured my truth onto the paper. Not every single notebook entry, but the undeniable, suffocating pattern. The endless guilt trips, the forced isolation, the time Dad physically blocked my exit, and the terrifying trap waiting for me tonight. I attached photocopies of 53 notebook pages and 16 text message screenshots. By 11:15 a.m., a duty judge reviewed my file. She signed it without hesitation. I stared at the official paper, trembling in my hands. My name, my parents' names. 600 feet, effective immediately. It felt like I was holding a magic shield. Morgan slid a second form across the table. Adult Protective Services complaint. This officially documents the long-term abuse. It forces a state investigation.
I signed my name hard enough to leave an indent. Morgan filed it electronically right there. While I waited in my car, she made one last call to police dispatch. She gave them my parents' address on Baxter Road. She warned them I was heading there this evening, an active protective order was in place, and I might need immediate backup. "You are not going into that house unprotected," Morgan promised, her tone hard as iron. "I'll park 2 streets over on Elm. You text me one word and I live update dispatch. They won't just get a standard 911 call, they'll get a play-by-play."
At 6:30 p.m., I pulled up to the curb outside my childhood home. The porch light glared into the dusk. Mom's sedan sat in the driveway, with an unfamiliar, heavy black truck parked right behind it. I clicked the voice recorder app on my phone, dropped it deep into my purse, and took a deep breath. Let's go. I wasn't scared to walk up those front steps. For the first time in my existence, the fear was completely gone, replaced by pure ice. The front door was unlocked. That was my first warning siren. Mom locks every door, always. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The living room stopped me dead in my tracks. A crisp white tablecloth draped the dining table. Expensive fresh flowers sat in a crystal vase I didn't recognize. Real candles flickered warmly along the mantel. The air smelled thickly of sweet gardenias and harsh furniture polish, the exact scent Mom uses when she is desperate to impress someone important. This was no family dinner. This was a stage. A man rose from the couch, tall, dark sport coat draped over a stiff button-down shirt, clean-shaven, somewhere around 39 years old. He looked at me and gave a single, slow nod. It was measured, calculating, like we had already signed a business deal. Ice water dumped into my veins, the dark coat, the flat, predatory stare. It was the man from the veterinary clinic. Wyatt Preston hadn't just driven 45 minutes for a blind arrangement. He had stalked my workplace yesterday to inspect the goods he was purchasing. Tucked quietly in the corner by the bookshelf sat a second man. Older, maybe late 50s, clutching a leather folder to his chest. He wore an ill-fitting gray suit and offered me a tight, nervous smile. The exact way people smile at terrified brides. Everything Aunt Delia warned me about was standing right in my living room, but as I looked at the empty chair they had placed specifically for me, directly across from the stranger who thought he owned me, I realized something horrifying. There was no food anywhere in sight. Only a single black pen resting perfectly beside my plate. My mother practically floated out of the kitchen. She wiped her hands on a floral dish towel, beaming a blinding, picture-perfect smile. "There she is. Come in, sweetheart. Everyone has been waiting." She said it so sweetly, like I was simply running late for a birthday party, and they had all been so graciously patient. I stood frozen. My eyes swept over the leather couch, the nervous officiant, the crisp white tablecloth, the flickering flames, and the expensive flowers. Then my gaze landed on the empty chair. It was positioned directly across from the stranger. No plates of food, no dinner napkins, just a stage. And right there, laid out perfectly next to my assigned seat, was a single black pen. This isn't a dining room, I thought, my chest tightening. This is an auction block. Then the breathless rush of pure terror finally hit me. Click, the heavy brass deadbolt snapped shut behind me. I spun around. Dad was standing flat against the front door. His thick arms were crossed over his flannel shirt. He didn't say a single word. He didn't have to. The cage was locked. Before I could even process the panic, Mom slid a thick stack of papers across the polished wood table. 7 pages stapled neatly in the top corner. I looked down. The bold header screamed at me. Irrevocable financial trust, proxy agreement, and covenant of union. I flipped to page 4. 2 signatures sat heavy at the bottom in dark blue ink. Gregory T. Alden, Lucille M. Alden, right beneath a line that proudly stated parental consent and endorsement. My name was already neatly typed into every single blank space. Daphne Marie Alden, printed out like a cheap form letter. I'm not a daughter. The realization hit me like a physical punch. I'm just a box they checked off. What is this? I breathed. Mom folded her hands peacefully on the table. Your future. Who signed this section? Your father and I, because you stubbornly refused to do it yourself. I have never met this person in my life.
You are meeting him right now, she snapped, the sweetness dropping for a fraction of a second. Sit down. The man on the couch stepped forward. He extended a large hand. I stared at it like it was a snake. I didn't reach out. I'm Wyatt Preston, he said. His tone was entirely flat. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't trying to be warm. It sounded strictly transactional, like he was closing a deal on a piece of farmland. I think you will find the terms very reasonable. I glanced at the officiant huddled in the corner. He nervously shifted the leather folder on his lap, looking at the floor, the ceiling, the bookshelves, anywhere but at my face. I looked back down at the awful contract. A specific clause caught my eye, one I almost skimmed past, but I forced my face to stay blank. I couldn't react. Not yet.
Wyatt's family has been incredibly patient, Mom cooed, reaching out to stroke my arm. Very generous. Wyatt coldly checked his expensive watch. That was the exact second the final piece of the nightmare clicked into place. He doesn't want a wife, my mind raced. He is here collecting on a massive debt, and my parents are using me as the payment. I stared at the black pen. I looked at the blank signature line waiting for my hand. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I dropped the contract onto the table. I stood up hard, the wooden chair legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I am not signing this. Mom's painted smile didn't twitch. You haven't finished reading it, dear. I don't need to finish reading it. I do not agree to this. I turned sharply toward the front door. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. Dad was already there. He assumed the exact same posture he held 4 years ago. Broad back flat against the wood, thick arms tightly folded across his chest, chin tucked down. He was a human wall built out of flannel and silent rage. I stopped 2 feet away from him. I was close enough to smell the bitter motor oil that never quite washed out of his knuckles. Move, Dad. Nothing. Not a blink. Dad, move. His dark eyes flicked over my shoulder to look at Mom, then darted back to me. He didn't unfold his arms. He didn't shift his heavy weight. He just stood there, completely solid, blocking the exit just like he had blocked every single choice I ever tried to make. Behind me, Mom's voice drifted over, dripping with twisted victory. See? You are not going anywhere tonight, Daphne. The air in the room suddenly felt thin. The officiant coughed quietly into his fist. Wyatt sat back down on the leather couch, crossing one leg over the other, acting like he had all the time in the world. 4 years ago, this exact scene shattered me. Dad blocking my escape, Mom narrating my failures from behind, trapping me in the middle. Back then, I sobbed. I physically pushed past him and ran away. But tonight is different. A tiny voice whispered inside my head. Tonight, there was a binding contract on the table, a hired official waiting in the corner, a stranger expecting to leave with a bride. Running away wouldn't stop them from hunting me down again. I took a deep, shaky breath, turned on my heel, walked right back to the table and sat down. Not because I surrendered. Mom's eyes lit up with triumph. She really thought she had won. She hadn't. She sat directly across from me and reached over the white cloth to grab my hands. I forced myself to let her take them. It took every ounce of strength I possessed not to violently pull away from her touch. Daphne, her voice softened into a sickeningly gentle hum. It was the exact tone she used when I was 13 and got cut from the volleyball team. The sympathy voice, the sharpest weapon she had spent 28 years perfecting. I carried you for almost 10 months. I raised you. I gave up everything. My figure, my social life, my entire career, just for you. 28 years of sacrifice. And the only thing I have ever asked in return is that you let me hold my head up proudly in this town. A single, perfect tear slid down her powdered cheek. Right on cue, I watched the officiant squirm in his seat out of the corner of my eye. He looked deeply uncomfortable. Good. He should feel terrible. Wyatt didn't even look at her crying. He just checked his watch again. Those fake tears weren't for him. They weren't even for me. They were a carefully rehearsed performance to keep the officiant sitting in his chair. Mom, I said, my voice eerily calm. Don't mom me, not tonight. Her breath hitched. Tonight, I whispered, staring dead into her eyes. You are going to do the right thing for once. I pulled my hands out of her grip, looked down at the twisted contract, picked up the thick black pen, and prepared to burn their entire illusion to the ground. I looked directly at my mother. I really stared at her, and I recognized the toxic, familiar cycle. First the fake tears, then the crushing guilt, then the absolute command. She played this exact game when I wanted to apply to a college out of state.
She did it when I signed the lease for my own apartment. She did it when I begged her to stop calling me every single day. Cry, blame, control, cry, blame, control. I knew the steps to this twisted dance by heart. 4 years ago, the suffocating pressure of this room would have shattered me into a million pieces. Tonight, it just proved every single entry in my hidden notebook was right. I picked up the heavy packet of papers. Mom instantly stopped crying. Her eyes flashed bright with greedy anticipation. She really thinks this is going to work, I thought. She thinks I am still that broken little girl. But I didn't reach for the pen. Sitting at that table, holding the physical weight of my life reduced to cheap blue ink, I kept asking myself a question. Why did my mother honestly think this would work? Did she truly believe I would sign a lifelong contract with a total stranger just because she shed a few watery tears? Or did she know exactly what she was doing and simply didn't care about my soul? What do you think? What makes a parent cross that invisible line from wanting the best for their child to deciding they own their child's entire future? Tell me in the comments. I didn't turn to my mother. I didn't look at Wyatt. I slowly turned my head to face the older man huddled in the corner. Excuse me, my voice was shockingly steady. I was almost surprised by my own calm. May I ask you something? The officiant sat up perfectly straight, clutching his leather folder. Of course. When were you officially contacted about this ceremony, and by whom? He blinked, clearly thrown off balance. Mrs. Alden reached out to me last week, he answered slowly. She told me both parties had happily consented. A heavy, thick pause dropped over the room.
He shot a nervous glance at my mother.
That is correct.
Well, I replied softly, tonight is the absolute first time I am hearing about this marriage. It is the first time I have ever laid eyes on Mr. Preston, and it is the very first time I am seeing this document. I held the stapled pages up in the air so he could clearly read the front cover. My name was filled into these blanks entirely without my knowledge. The room went instantly dead. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the terrifying, electric stillness right before a storm breaks. The officiant, Dean Kendall, licensed by the county, stared directly at my mother. His polite, paid-for smile vanished completely. Mrs. Alden, you told me both parties. She is just nervous, Mom interrupted loudly, her pitch rising. Silly pre-wedding jitters. You know how dramatic young women get. I am not being dramatic, I corrected her, my tone turning to ice. I am telling you the facts. Kendall looked at the twisted contract in my hands, then at the heavy front door where my massive father stood guard, and finally back to my face. I leaned forward in my chair just an inch. You understand that under Georgia state law, a marriage ceremony conducted without the voluntary spoken consent of both adult parties is completely void, and the officiant who performs it can face serious criminal liability. I watched the healthy color drain out of his cheeks one shade at a time. Mom let out a harsh, forced laugh. Daphne, stop with the ridiculous dramatics. But Kendall wasn't laughing. He started shifting his weight, no longer sitting comfortably. The raw power in the room had suddenly changed hands. I could feel the current snapping in a brand new direction. Kendall planted his feet to stand up. Mom's arm shot across the space like a whip. Sit down. Her sweet mask hit the floor and shattered into dust. She turned back to me, and for the very first time all evening, I saw the real Lucille Alden. Not the weeping mother, not the gracious party hostess, the pure controller, Daphne Marie Alden. I am not asking for your opinion. I am telling you what is going to happen. From his post blocking the exit, Dad finally spoke. 2 dark words, dropping like concrete blocks. Listen to your mother. Mom glared at the pale officiant. You do your job. I have already paid you. Kendall stayed frozen, hovering halfway out of his seat. Wyatt let out a loud, frustrated sigh on the leather couch. He uncrossed his legs. His reasonable, calm disguise cracked wide open, revealing raw, ugly impatience underneath. I did not drive 45 minutes out here for a family debate. Are we doing this or not? I stared straight into his dark eyes. Are you asking me or are you asking them? Because from where I am sitting, you are only negotiating with my captors. Wyatt opened his mouth, closed it, and shot an angry look at Dad. I glanced toward the kitchen. The glowing green numbers on the microwave clock read 7:45 p.m. Mom marched over, leaning right over the table. She lowered her tone, making it sound like she was sharing a dark secret, but her eyes were pure venom. 4 years you have been living on your own, she hissed. And what do you possibly have to show for it? A cheap little apartment and cleaning up after somebody else's dirty dogs? She delivered the insult like it was an undeniable tragic fact, like she had measured my entire existence and found it completely worthless. I held her furious gaze. Inside my purse, my phone buzzed a single time, then a second time. Morgan. I didn't need to check the screen. I knew dispatch was ready. Mom kept rambling over the noise in my head. Something about Wyatt's rich family, their massive property, how established they were in the county. I only heard every third word. The rest faded into static. His mother, God rest her soul, would have absolutely loved you. Daphne. Mom's voice sharpened into a blade. Are you even listening to me? Every single word. She leaned down so close I could feel her breath. Her sickening vanilla perfume flooded the space between us. You have exactly 2 choices tonight. You pick up that pen and sign this contract, or you never ever call me Mom again. I heard it. I really heard the threat, and suddenly the most incredible sensation washed over my body. I felt completely weightless. It was like she had just proudly unlocked a heavy iron door that she actually meant to permanently weld shut. She had just handed me the key to my own freedom. I looked around the suffocating room one last time. Dad standing guard, Mom seething with red-faced rage, Wyatt annoyed on the sofa, Kendall sweating in the corner, wishing he was anywhere else on planet Earth. I casually slipped my hand into my purse. They thought they had me perfectly backed into a corner, completely alone, but they had no idea I brought a match to their little bonfire. My thumb hovered over the send button and my timer hit 0. I slid my phone out of my purse, just far enough to see the blindingly bright screen in the dim room. Morgan's text message glared up at me, confirmed with dispatch. Send the word anytime. Now my brain screamed, do it now before you lose your nerve. My thumb moved purely on practiced muscle memory. One single word, sent. Suddenly a shadow eclipsed the table. Dad lunged from the doorway. He didn't just step forward, he practically hurled his massive frame across the room. His heavy oil-stained hand clamped violently over my purse strap, ripping the leather right off my shoulder. You are not calling anyone, he barked, his voice rough like crushed gravel. He blindly tossed my bag behind him. It hit the armchair with a sickening thud. My heart hammered against my ribs like a terrified trapped bird. A single bead of cold sweat rolled slowly down the back of my neck. All the air in the room vanished, instantly suffocated by the heavy stench of vanilla and rising panic. Breathe, I told myself. Do not let them see you shake. The trap is sprung, but they don't know who is caught inside. I didn't break. I didn't cry. The text was already gone. The real power wasn't sitting in that tossed purse anymore. It was already racing down Baxter Road. I smiled. Not the small, weak, placating curve of the lips I had been trained to give them for 28 years. Not the nervous, please don't be mad apology they expected. A real, dangerous smile. Calm and crystal clear, the absolute peace of someone who knows exactly how this nightmare ends. Mom's eyes narrowed into angry slits. What is so funny? Nothing is funny, Mom. Not a single thing. I slowly reached out and picked up the heavy contract again, page by crisp page. Since we are all gathered here, I said smoothly, my voice echoing in the quiet room, let me share exactly what I found in this generous offer. Mom immediately sat up straighter. A greedy gleam returned to her eye. She actually thought I was finally surrendering. I flipped loudly to page 3, section 4, Assets of the Bride. I dragged my finger across the blue ink. Someone thoughtfully listed my exact savings account balance, $8,523. I looked up, freezing her with my stare. I have never shared that private number with a single living soul in this room. Yet here it is, my life's sweat traded like a poker chip. Total silence. I turned the paper. Page 5, section 8, Marital Residence. I read the words slowly, tasting the poison in them. The Preston property on Route 14. No alternative listed. 0 option for independent housing. Wyatt shifted uncomfortably, finally uncrossing his legs. I flipped again. Page 6, section 10. I made sure every single syllable landed like a heavy stone on the white tablecloth. The bride agrees to completely relinquish independent employment within 90 days of the marriage date. I let the page drop. You want me to quit my job? Mom's face hardened into a blank stone mask. Wyatt's family does not need you working in some dirty clinic. This isn't about what his rich family needs, I fired back, my voice vibrating with sudden raw heat. This is about completely erasing my income so I can never afford to escape. I didn't let her speak. I pushed to the final clause, and Section 11, I continued, my words slicing right through the heavy air. The bride happily agrees to assume full-time domestic guardianship of 2 minor children. A bought and paid-for nanny, a fake mommy for a judge. I looked directly at Wyatt. The ugly, jagged pieces finally snapped together into a perfectly sick picture. You are fighting a vicious custody battle right now, your ex-wife. You desperately need a stable, boring, stay-at-home stepmother on paper to show the family court judge. And my mother is selling you one. I glanced at Kendall. The officiant's leather folder was snapped shut. His pale, sweaty hands were locked tightly on top of it. He was staring at me the way you watch a horrific car crash, totally paralyzed, unable to look away. I turned back to the man on the couch. Did you write this garbage, or did my mother? Wyatt's jaw tightened dangerously. The terms are standard. Standard for what, exactly? A hostage situation? No answer. I turned my burning eyes back to the woman across from me. You dug into my bank balance. You negotiated my prison cell. You wrote a legal chain that kills my ability to earn a single dime, and you signed it away before I even walked through the front door. I slammed the contract down dead in the center of the table. This is not a marriage, Mom. This is a human sale. The word hung in the air between us like a lit match. I whipped around to face my father. He hadn't moved an inch from the front door. He hadn't spoken more than 2 grunted words all night. Dad? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Exactly how much money do you owe the Prestons? His thick chin lifted just a fraction. That is none of your business. It is directly my business, because I am the exact currency you are using to pay it off. The room went incredibly still. Even the candle flames seemed to freeze. Wyatt nervously looked at Gregory. Gregory stubbornly stared at the floorboards. Mom's open hand violently smacked the tabletop. Don't you dare accuse your hard-working father. $50,000, I stated evenly, cutting her off completely. The truth sets you free, but first, it burns everything down. But it isn't a bad land loan, is it, Dad? I watched his massive shoulders flinch. Aunt Delia told me the ugly truth. It is Derek, your precious golden boy. He embezzled from Wyatt's company to cover his massive gambling debts, and instead of letting your perfect son go to jail like he deserves, you both decided to sell your disposable daughter to his boss. Gregory's arms finally dropped heavily to his sides. It was the first time his armor cracked all night. Wyatt's arrogant composure shattered. He sprang to his feet from the leather couch. I do not think that is an accurate characterization. Then correct me, I screamed back. He didn't, he couldn't. Kendall practically jumped out of his corner chair, white-knuckling his folder. I think I need to deeply reassess the situation here. Sit down, Mom's shriek broke high and sharp, the exact kind of glass-shattering sound that carries straight through neighborhood walls. I paid you, you are going to— Ma'am, Kendall shouted back, holding up a shaking hand. If this is not a completely voluntary union, I cannot legally proceed. I will not proceed. He scrambled toward the front door. But Gregory was still standing there. He was no longer blocking it with angry purpose. He was blocking it with pure habit, with his massive size, with the sheer terrifying inertia of a desperate man who simply doesn't know how to step aside. Nobody is leaving yet, Gregory grunted. It wasn't loud, it sounded almost exhausted. Kendall stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at the heavy door. He looked up at Gregory's towering frame. Then he looked at me. I watched the absolute horror fully register on the officiant's pale face. The chilling realization that he, too, was now trapped in this cage. Delia, Mom hissed viciously under her breath, pacing the floor. I will deal with her. Kendall took one brave, shaky step toward my father. Mr. Alden, I desperately need to leave right now. This is done, sir. It is entirely done. I am not performing this sick ceremony. Gregory didn't move a single muscle. He filled that doorway the exact way he always had, not with explosive rage, but with crushing, immovable mass. But just as the terrified officiant backed away from my father's unyielding shadow, a faint, high-pitched wail pierced the quiet night air outside. The sound was growing louder by the second, and I knew exactly what it was. My father is a man who truly believes that simply standing completely still is the exact same thing as being right. I checked the glowing green numbers on the kitchen microwave again. 8:05 p.m. Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the thick, terrified silence. You are physically preventing 4 adult people from leaving this house. Do you have any idea what the law calls that? He didn't answer. He just stared straight ahead, a human brick wall. It is called unlawful restraint, I told him, perfectly calm. In the state of Georgia, it is a serious misdemeanor. But if it involves any threat of physical violence, it instantly becomes a felony. His thick, oil-stained hands hanging heavily at his sides, slowly curled into tight fists. Not to hit anyone. I know my father better than that. It was just the only way he knew how to hold his crumbling world together when someone finally challenged his absolute rule. Somewhere outside in the dark, very faint at first, I heard it. A high, thin wail, a ghost of a sound piercing the quiet neighborhood. I wasn't entirely sure they heard it yet. I turned my attention back to the table. I picked up their twisted marriage contract, squared the messy edges neatly, and centered it perfectly between the expensive flowers and my empty, unlit place setting. Then I stood up slowly. The wooden chair barely made a whisper against the floorboards. I looked deeply at my mother's furious face. I looked at my father's rigid jaw. I looked at Wyatt Preston, the arrogant stranger who had confidently driven 45 minutes to purchase a human being to win a cheap custody battle. And I smiled again. Mom, Dad, my voice was so incredibly steady it didn't even feel like it belonged to me. You really should have read what I filed yesterday morning. 4 seconds of absolute silence followed. They were the longest, heaviest 4 seconds that living room had ever contained. What did you file? Mom's voice was suddenly thin, stripped of all its commanding power. Keep the purse, Dad, I said smoothly. I reached deep into the hidden inside pockets of my long winter coat. I slowly pulled out 2 crisp, cream-colored envelopes. I placed the first one flat on the white tablecloth. This is an emergency protective order. It was legally signed this morning by a duty judge at the county courthouse. It officially prohibits both of you from contacting me or coming within 600 feet of me. Effective immediately. Mom stopped breathing. I gently placed the second heavy envelope right beside it. And this is a formal registered complaint filed with Adult Protective Services. It heavily documents a years-long pattern of coercive control, emotional manipulation, and forced isolation. I set them down right next to the disgusting marriage contract. 3 legal documents resting on a pristine white tablecloth. 2 of theirs, 2 of mine. The room completely stopped spinning. Everything froze. Then Mom's cell phone violently buzzed on the kitchen counter, a harsh electronic chime. It was an automated notification directly from the county court system. A second later, Dad's phone vibrated loudly in his back pocket, buzzing against the wooden doorframe. And from outside, the faint wailing sound was no longer a ghost. It was a screaming siren getting dangerously close and then aggressively stopping, right in front of our front lawn. Morgan had done her job absolutely perfectly. Mom started screaming. It wasn't words, just a high, panicked noise. She scrambled to grab her phone off the marble counter. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking so violently she had to type her passcode twice just to unlock the screen. I watched her face as she read the glowing text, the official notification from the court system, her full name, my name, the strict order number, the unbreakable terms. Her mouth opened wide, then clicked closed, then opened again like a fish gasping for air. What is this? What did you do? Dad pulled his heavy phone from his back pocket. He got the exact same notification. He read it the way he reads every piece of paper, slowly, his lips slightly moving over the legal words. And in that terrifying second, I saw something I had never ever seen on Gregory Alden's face in 28 years. Pure, unadulterated fear. Wyatt Preston was already scrambling to his feet, knocking his knees against the coffee table. I haven't signed anything. I am not a part of this. I need to leave right now. For the first time all night, his flat, transactional businessman voice had a desperate crack right down the middle. He wasn't worried about securing a fake wedding anymore. He was absolutely terrified for his own reputation. Kendall, the sweating officiant, finally saw his golden opening. The exact moment Gregory absent-mindedly stepped away from the door to check his buzzing phone, Kendall moved surprisingly fast for a 61-year-old man. He grabbed the brass handle, yanked the heavy front door open, and squeezed through it before anyone could even react. Blinding blue and red police lights instantly pulsed through the open doorway. The violent strobe colors washed aggressively across the pristine white tablecloth. They flashed over the expensive flowers, the marriage contract, and my mother's horrified face. A marked patrol car was parked aggressively at the curb, its heavy engine still running loudly. I could hear Kendall's voice outside on the porch, talking rapidly, breathlessly explaining to someone in uniform. Then, heavy, purposeful boots stepped onto the wooden porch. Mom slowly turned her head to look at me. It wasn't burning anger in her eyes. Not yet. That would come much later. Right now, it was something far worse for a controller. Complete disbelief. The utterly shattered expression of a woman whose perfect script had just been set on fire. She had written every single line of this twisted play. And suddenly, she didn't recognize the final act. Daphne! Her voice cracked right down the center, sounding raw and broken. You called the police on your own parents? I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. The sharp, commanding knock on the open door frame answered for me. The officer standing at the threshold was a tall woman in her early 40s. Her dark hair was pulled tightly back, and she had incredibly calm, observing eyes that took in the entire chaotic room in about 3 flat seconds. Good evening. I am Officer Harper with the County Sheriff's Department. We received a direct notification that an emergency protective order is actively in effect at this exact address. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to be loud to command the space. I stepped forward, leaving the table behind. I am Daphne Alden. I am the legal petitioner on that protective order. I was invited to this house under completely false pretenses, and I was physically prevented from leaving through that door. Harper looked right past me. Her sharp eyes scanned the white tablecloth, the melted candles, the twisted marriage contract, and the 2 cream envelopes. Then her gaze locked onto Gregory, who was standing frozen 3 feet from the open door, his thick arms dropping uselessly at his sides. Sir, the officer's voice was like steel. Did you physically prevent anyone from leaving this private residence tonight? This is my house, Gregory grunted defensively. That is not the question I asked you. Kendall's frantic voice echoed from the dark porch directly behind her. Officer, I was also forcibly prevented from leaving. I am a state-licensed officiant. I was brought to this property under the strict representation that both parties joyfully consented. That is clearly not the case here. Harper nodded a single time. She stepped fully inside the living room as a second younger officer appeared right behind her, taking a firm stance near the exit. Mr. and Mrs. Alden, Officer Harper declared, her tone leaving absolutely zero room for debate. I am going to need to speak with each of you separately. And sir, if you could step outside with my partner right now. Gregory Alden stared at the young, unyielding officer blocking his own front door. He looked back at Mom, who was frozen with one hand clamped over her mouth. Then, for one long, suffocating moment, his dark eyes locked onto mine. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just turned around and walked out the front door without speaking a single word. His heavy work boots thumped slowly against the wooden porch boards. It was the absolute first time in my 28 years of existence I had ever watched my giant father walk away from a doorway simply because someone else ordered him to do it. Officer Harper turned her sharp focus back to me. Her authoritative tone dropped instantly, shifting from a hard command to something far gentler. It was a practiced, professional warmth that told me she had dealt with scenes exactly like this one before. You are completely safe now, Miss Alden. Is there absolutely anything else you need immediately? I slowly shook my head, my hands finally beginning to tremble. Just this. Just to be believed. In a tiny town like Grayson, Georgia, a marked police cruiser parked aggressively on your quiet residential street is practically a headline in the morning paper. But a police cruiser sitting in your driveway, with its harsh blue and red lights still violently strobing against the houses, that is the front page Sunday edition. Mrs. Peterson from next door was already standing openly on her front porch. She had her arms crossed tightly over her floral housecoat, her glowing cell phone clutched in her hand. She wasn't even pretending she wasn't eagerly watching the disaster unfold. Directly across the dark street, the Dalton family's front porch light clicked on. Down by the corner, I clearly saw a living room curtain violently twitch at the Rowland house. Mom saw it too. She was standing rigid by the large living room window. The vertical blinds were still pushed half open from when the terrified officiant had shoved his way out the door. The aggressive police lights painted her pale, shocked face in alternating, violent colors. Her tight jaw was clenched so hard I could physically see the strained muscles standing out in her neck. "Are you completely happy now?" she hissed, finally turning to face me. Her voice was incredibly low, dripping with pure toxic venom. "You have completely destroyed this entire family. The whole street is watching us." "I didn't destroy a single thing in this house, Mom," I replied softly, my voice shockingly steady against her rage. "I simply turned on the lights so everyone could finally see exactly what you were doing in the dark." She physically flinched backward, a real, honest flinch, like the simple truth carried actual physical weight. Outside in the cool night air, the younger officer was intensely questioning Wyatt Preston. Wyatt had cowardly tried to slip out unnoticed through the back kitchen door. I saw him clearly through the glass window over the sink, standing nervously by his massive black truck. He threw his hands wide open in a pathetic, defensive gesture. I was just invited here as a formal guest. I heard his arrogant voice carry across the yard. Mr. Alden personally contacted me, and I only came as a polite courtesy. He was already aggressively throwing Gregory straight under the bus. 45 long minutes of calculated partnership instantly dissolved in 30 desperate seconds of pure self-preservation. Officer Harper was standing calmly at the dining table, rapidly taking notes on a small black pad. She had carefully lifted the stapled marriage contract and placed it securely inside a clear plastic evidence bag. It sat there on the crisp white tablecloth, looking exactly like a dead body waiting on a coroner's stretcher. Mom whispered furiously toward the window pane. Not specifically to me, not to anyone in particular. Everyone is going to know about this, the entire town. Yes, Mom, I answered quietly. They absolutely will, and for the very first time in your entire life, you will not be able to completely control the narrative. Out on the brightly lit front porch, Dean Kendall gave his frantic statement. He nervously handed Officer Harper his glowing cell phone, desperately swiping to show her the saved email chain directly from Lucille Alden. He pointed to the exact date, the precise time, and the mobile payment confirmation. She had sent him $350 through a cash app. The subject line was chillingly simple. Thursday ceremony. Alden/Preston. She explicitly told me both parties were incredibly eager for this, Kendall practically pleaded, his voice cracking loudly. She swore to me her daughter was just terribly shy, but deeply happy about the arrangement. She promised me this was a joyous family celebration. Harper meticulously documented every single detail in her notebook. The digital email timestamps, the illegal marriage contract now firmly sealed in plastic, Kendall's detailed physical description of the entire evening, who sat where, what was specifically threatened, and the exact terrifying moment he tried to escape and was physically blocked by my father. She turned back to face me. Miss Alden, I have the emergency protective order number confirmed on file. However, your parents will officially be notified right now that any future contact with you is strictly prohibited under the legal terms of the order. I reached into my coat pocket and handed her a freshly printed copy of the EPO. I followed it with a bright yellow sticky note containing my Adult Protective Services case number. Then, I told her about the digital voice recording still silently running on my phone, currently buried inside my stolen purse on the armchair. I have been actively recording everything since the exact second I walked through that door. Harper paused mid-sentence. She looked at me intently. She wasn't surprised, exactly. It was more like she was rapidly recalibrating my entire situation in her mind. That is completely admissible in court in Georgia, she confirmed simply. We are a one-party consent state. I nodded slowly. From the dark driveway, the younger officer was loudly reading Gregory his official rights regarding the citation. Unlawful restraint. He wrote it up right there on the hood of the cruiser. It wasn't an immediate arrest, not tonight, but it was a terrifyingly formal, permanent record, a permanent, indestructible paper trail for a man who had never faced a consequence in his life. Kendall turned to look at me one last time before he scrambled to his car. His pale eyes were heavily red-rimmed. Miss Alden, I swear to you I didn't know. I am truly deeply sorry for my part in this. I believe you, I said simply. He practically ran to his sedan, started the engine, and pulled away incredibly slowly, like he was desperately trying not to make any more noise in a night that had already been entirely too loud. I stood alone on the front porch and silently watched his red taillights disappear into the dark. But as the police lights continued to slash across the lawn, Officer Harper turned to my father, who was standing motionless under the old pecan tree, and delivered the final, devastating blow to his untouchable pride. Officer Harper calmly handed Gregory the bright yellow citation paper. She explained exactly what unlawful restraint meant on a permanent record. It was a formal misdemeanor. No handcuffs tonight, but an undeniable, legally binding document with his name, the exact date, and a clinical description of his crime. I watched my father process those heavy words. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just stood barefoot on the damp front lawn, right under the massive pecan tree he planted the year I was born. Right before my eyes, something fundamental inside his posture broke. The intimidating shoulders that had dominated every doorway of my childhood suddenly shrank. The thick arms that had been folded like an iron shield now hung loosely at his sides, totally defeated. He stared at me through the open door. There was no burning anger in his expression. It was an emotion I had never witnessed from him before. Total confusion. He is waiting for me to fix this, I realized, my chest tightening. He expects me to lower my eyes and give him that pathetic tiny nod of apology I was trained to offer since I was a little girl. I held his gaze. I didn't blink. I absolutely refused to nod. The invisible chain between us finally snapped. I turned my back on him and walked inside. Mom was sitting rigidly at the ruined dining table, placed exactly in the seat they had assigned for my fake ceremony. The expensive candles had burned down, leaving ugly pools of thick wax drying on the white tablecloth. She was glaring fiercely at the 2 cream envelopes I had left behind. "This isn't over, Daphne," she hissed, her voice shaking with raw, wounded pride. "I will hire a lawyer. I will." Officer Harper stepped smoothly back into the room. "Ma'am, I strongly advise you to secure an attorney for yourself." Mom snapped her mouth shut. "Adult Protective Services will be contacting both of you within 7 business days, Harper added strictly. "That formal investigation is already open." For the absolute first time in my existence, Lucille Alden did not have a rehearsed line prepared. That sudden, crushing silence was the loudest sound I had ever experienced in that house. Outside, Wyatt Preston was officially released. Harper warned him he might receive a legal subpoena. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. He practically crawled into his black truck, cranked the engine, and backed down the long driveway with the frantic speed of a coward. That arrogant man drove 45 minutes to buy a human being, and he went home with absolutely nothing. Harper gently touched my arm. "Miss Alden, you are completely free to leave. If either of them breaches the 600-foot limit, call dispatch immediately." I thanked her sincerely. As the younger officer headed back toward the cruiser, he murmured, "First time I've ever seen anything like this in Grayson." I scooped up my battered purse. $50,000. That was the exact price tag my flesh and blood slapped onto my soul. I walked out the front door, stepping into the cool night air entirely on my own terms. The drive back to my apartment was 50 minutes of echoing silence. My headlights sliced through the pitch-black stretch of Route 11. Suddenly, my hands started violently shaking. They hadn't trembled all evening. But now, sitting completely alone in the dark car with zero audience to perform for, my exhausted body finally caught up to the trauma. I thought deeply about my mother, the mom who used to gently braid my hair and make warm macaroni when I was sick. Then I contrasted her with the woman I saw tonight, the stranger eagerly signing a binding contract with my forged name. Both of those women are my mother. That is the brutal reality nobody warns you about. The people capable of hurting you the most profoundly aren't creepy strangers. They are the ones who raised you. They know exactly where your softest spots are hidden, because they are the ones who created them. I pulled into my parking spot at 9:35 p.m. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, locked the deadbolt, and slid slowly down the painted kitchen wall. And then I cried. It was a hard, deafening sob, the kind of crying you release when nobody is watching and you finally have permission to stop being strong. Morgan called at 10 o'clock. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "I honestly don't know," I choked out, "but I am safe." I fell asleep right there on the hard floor. When the morning sun woke me up on Friday, my phone screen was lit up with a terrifying number, 28 missed calls. And the very first message I opened proved that Lucille Alden wasn't done destroying things yet. I sat on the cold linoleum of my kitchen floor and scrolled blindly through 28 missed calls. 14 were from my mother. I could perfectly trace her entire emotional collapse just by looking at the timestamps. First, they were 4 minutes apart, frantic, furious, demanding energy. Then came longer, agonizing gaps. Finally, a heavy cluster hit my phone around 3 a.m., right when her desperate weeping phase always kicks in. 5 missed calls from Dad. Not a single voicemail left behind. Classic Gregory. Call, wait, hang up, repeat. He was actively delivering his suffocating disappointment in silent, heavy installments. There was one single call from Wyatt Preston's cell. I tapped the screen. The number was already disconnected and blocked on his end. He was cowardly scrubbing his tracks, pretending he had never stepped foot in that living room. I called Aunt Delia back first. "You okay, baby?" she breathed the second she answered. "Exhausted," I whispered, resting my heavy head against the cabinets. "But I'm okay. What are you hearing?" Delia let out a long, ragged exhale. "It is absolutely everywhere." Mrs. Peterson blabbed to her entire neighborhood walking group before the sun even came up. By noon today, Every single woman in Grayson who owns a pair of sneakers knows there were flashing police lights parked in your mama's driveway. The perfect, spotless illusion is finally shattered. Just as we hung up, my screen vibrated with a massive text block from Mom. It read exactly like a formal legal brief, dripping with redirected guilt. I read the very first sentence. "You have completely destroyed your father and me. I cannot even show my face in public. I hope you are thoroughly satisfied." I didn't reply. I simply screenshotted the nasty message, dragged it into my digital evidence folder, and filed it away. Date, time, subject line. It was totally automatic now. I wasn't a crying victim anymore. I was a machine. Delia had warned me about one more thing. Mom had frantically called Aunt Pamela, spinning a wild lie that I had been psychologically influenced to turn against the family. Lucille Alden simply refuses to lose. If she is caught in a trap, she just tries to rewrite history. But this time there were entirely too many sworn witnesses. The validation came the following Tuesday. An adult protective services caseworker named Sylvia Winston called me. Her voice was professional, warm, and wonderfully thorough. They had officially launched a state investigation. "Miss Alden," Sylvia told me gently, "your file is honestly one of the most incredibly detailed reports we have ever received. The timeline, the saved screenshots, the corroborating witness statements. It paints an undeniable picture of severe abuse." She asked for the original blue notebook. I practically sprinted to her office to hand it over. Morgan gave me the legal updates later that afternoon. Gregory's unlawful restraint citation was fully processed. It was a formal misdemeanor sitting permanently on his spotless record. Kendall, the terrified officiant, had practically sprinted to the authorities to submit a voluntary, unprompted statement to save his own license. He detailed the money transfer, the emails, and the terrifying moment my father blocked the exit. And Wyatt, he completely ghosted them. He canceled the twisted debt for bride deal and vanished. The massive $50,000 debt was still hanging squarely over Gregory's head, but the human currency he tried to use to pay it off was permanently off the table. My parents tried one last, desperate strike. Their hired attorney mailed me a pathetic letter demanding I drop the protective order, claiming I had grossly exaggerated a minor family disagreement. Morgan laughed out loud, called it blatant harassment, and instantly submitted it to the judge as Exhibit B. 4 days later, Mom actually called the veterinary clinic. Dr. Miller pulled me into her private office. Her face was incredibly careful and kind. "Your mother called here this morning. She stated that you are emotionally unstable and should not be trusted with the animals." My stomach instantly dropped into my shoes. "She is trying to take my livelihood." Dr. Miller firmly placed her hand on my shoulder. "I told her that you are easily the most reliable, hard-working person on my entire staff, and I promised her that if she ever calls my business again, I will personally file severe workplace harassment charges against her." Tears violently pricked my eyes. A near stranger was fiercely protecting me better than the woman who gave me life. Lucille was rapidly running out of levers to pull. The morning walking group quietly stopped inviting her. People at the local hardware store made uncomfortable small talk and quickly walked away. Grayson is small enough that everybody knows your dirty secrets, but polite enough that nobody ever says it to your face. They just let you freeze to death in the social winter. Then Gregory called my cell from an unblocked clinic line. "I didn't know it would ever go this far," his rough voice grated through the speaker. "But you still physically blocked the door, Dad." Silence. Then, the sharp click of a dead line. I told Morgan about it over hot coffee. She looked right through me. "He is not sorry for what he actually did to you, Daphne. He is only sorry that it didn't work. There are late, quiet nights when I still wonder if I was entirely too harsh, if I should have just quietly run away instead of dropping a legal bomb on my own family. But then I vividly remember the heavy deadbolt clicking shut. I remember the blank signature line waiting for my hand. I remember Dad's broad back pressed against the wood. If you were standing in my shoes, surrounded by those monsters, would you have called for help? Tell me below. The next morning, I officially renewed the emergency protective order for a full 12 months. I had successfully locked my abusers out of my life for an entire year, but sitting alone at my kitchen table, staring at my open laptop, I realized there was still one incredibly difficult thing I had to do. I had to permanently hand them the heavy keys to their own prison. I sat at my small kitchen table on a quiet Saturday morning. I opened my laptop, took a deep breath of free air, and typed a single email addressed to both of them. It was short. It was incredibly clear. There was zero burning anger in my words, no wild accusations, and absolutely no drama. Just the heavy, unbreakable truth. "Mom, Dad, the boundary I have set is not a punishment. It is simply a lock on a door you repeatedly tried to break down. Until you complete professional family counseling, verbally acknowledge the absolute truth of what happened, and respect this physical distance without a judge actively forcing you to, this door remains permanently shut. The keys are in your hands. I read it twice. I hit send. I finally built the fence, I thought. Now let's see if they actually try to climb it. Mom violently replied within 5 hours. It was a 5-page email, single-spaced and practically vibrating with rage. She completely blamed Aunt Delia for poisoning my mind. She blamed modern culture for making daughters deeply disrespectful. She blamed my clinic job, my cheap apartment, and my hard-earned independence. She fiercely blamed everything and everyone under the sun, except the woman who had actually signed a human contract on behalf of her own adult daughter. In 5 massive pages of text, she never once typed the words, "I am sorry." Dad didn't reply at all. His silence was still his favorite weapon. I read Mom's frantic email exactly halfway through. Then I quietly archived it. I didn't delete it. I might need it for the court someday. But I didn't finish reading it either. There was nothing inside those 5 rambling pages I hadn't already heard 1,000 times before. A boundary is not a brick wall. It is a heavy door with a strong lock, and the key is sitting right in their open hands. But so far, they absolutely refuse to pick it up. Aunt Delia and I have a beautiful new tradition now. Every single Saturday morning, we meet at a little diner halfway between our 2 towns. It is a cozy place called Rosie's, filled with cracked vinyl booths, coffee that is way too strong, and massive pancakes the size of your head. Delia always arrives first. She always orders my coffee right before I sit down. Black with exactly 1 sugar. It is the exact way she taught me to drink it when I was 17. She used to look at me and say, "If you are going to be a woman born into this family, you better learn to like things that taste a little bitter." Last Saturday, she finally told me the dark truth about her own marriage, the one Lucille always publicly calls a massive failure. Delia told me how her ex-husband used to secretly open her mail, obsessively check her car mileage, and actively time her trips to the grocery store. She told me how she stayed trapped for 18 agonizing years, purely because her older sister, my mother, kept telling her it was completely normal. "I finally left when I was 45, Delia said, slowly stirring her dark coffee. 18 years too late. I instantly recognized what your mother was doing to you, baby, because I lived inside a different version of that exact same cage." I reached across the sticky table and held her warm hand. "You are the absolute first person in this entire family who ever told me I was allowed to say no." She squeezed my fingers back fiercely. "It took me 18 years to learn how to say that word for myself." Morgan showed up 10 minutes late, the exact way she always does. She slid happily into the vinyl booth, ordered a massive coffee, and pulled out her glowing phone. "Adult Protective Services fully finalized their report," she announced, flashing a brilliant smile. "The massive file is permanently documented and officially archived. If absolutely anything happens in the future, any contact violation, any bizarre escalation, it will instantly be referenced." I nodded slowly, taking a long sip of my bitter coffee. I looked out the diner window at the cracked asphalt parking lot. The bright morning sun was just hitting the deep puddles left over from last night's heavy rain, turning them into shimmering mirrors. For the absolute first time in my entire life, I wasn't anxiously waiting for the other shoe to drop. I had finally thrown the shoes away, and Saturday actually felt like a Saturday. I am not telling you this dark story so you will feel sorry for me. I do not need pity, and honestly, pity wouldn't help. I am telling you all of this because 4 years ago, sitting totally alone in my car with violently shaking hands, I desperately wish someone had said what I am about to say to you right now. Setting a firm boundary is not a brutal betrayal. Protecting your own peace is not cruelty. And keeping a meticulous record of what is happening to you, writing it down, dating it, boldly saving the screenshots, is not crazy paranoia. It is survival preparation. You may never actually need to use it, but if you do, you will be incredibly grateful it is there. My parents are not evil monsters. I really need you to hear that truth. They are just deeply broken people who grew up trapped inside a toxic system that taught them children are literal property, a system that preaches obedience equals love, and total control equals safety. I understand exactly where their trauma comes from, but I can hold that deep understanding in one hand and still confidently say that what they did to me was unforgivably wrong. Both of those things are entirely true at the exact same time. I do love them, but I love them from this safe side of the boundary line, from the side where I can finally breathe, where I can freely choose, where absolutely nobody gets to sign my name without my spoken permission. The navy blue notebook is still sitting inside my nightstand drawer. I do not open the heavy pages anymore, but I know it is there. It reminds me every single morning when I wake up. I wasn't crazy. I was never crazy. My name is Daphne Alden. I am 28 years old, and on a terrifying Thursday night in November, for the very first time in my life, I walked out of my parents' house. Not because I was violently pushed out, but because I bravely chose to go. That is the entire difference. That is absolutely everything. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the bitter end. That means more to me than you could ever know. If you have ever had to draw a hard line with someone you deeply love, you know exactly how impossibly heavy that feels, and how beautifully necessary it is. Hit the like button if you truly think Daphne made the right call. Drop a raw comment below if you have a survival story of your own. I sit and read every single one, and you would be absolutely shocked to see how many people in these comments are secretly fighting the exact same invisible war right now. Subscribe and hit the bell icon if you desperately need more stories like this one. And look down in the description right now. There is another intense story waiting that I really think you need to hear. Do not skip it. I'll see you there.